My name is Lucy. I'm 36 years old, living in the suburbs of Virginia with my husband and son. Few people know that behind our three-story house with a perfectly trimmed garden lies a silent hell I've endured for nearly a decade. That evening, during my mother-in-law Margaret's birthday party under the sparkling lights, the clinking of wine glasses and sweet, insincere toasts, my husband Ethan hurled a glass of red wine straight at me. My white dress soaked through, the smell of alcohol seeped into every thread, every inch of skin. The room fell completely silent. No one spoke up. Some even pressed their lips into a smile. But just when I thought I would be the only one humiliated, my 10-year-old son, Jacob, suddenly stood up. He held a small camcorder, his voice eerily calm. "My mom has had enough. Grandpa will know the truth tonight." The entire room froze. All eyes turned toward him. "Ethan." His face turned ashen like ashes. "Have you ever stayed silent? Because you thought it would protect your child? And then that very child stood up to protect you. Share your story in the comments below. If you believe in truth, justice, and love, hit like and subscribe. Because right now, I'm going to tell you everything how a 10-year-old boy brought down an entire powerful family to save his mother. I still remember the cold sensation of red wine running down my collar, soaking through thin fabric and clinging to my skin like a stain that could never be washed away. The once noisy dinner table turned mute. A few forks were still frozen midair. I stood there silently, gripping the wet hem of my dress, trying not to tremble under the smug gaze of my mother-in-law, Margaret, and the thin, knife-like smirk of Chloe, Ethan's sister. "Oh dear, maybe she should have chosen a darker color." Margaret sighed, her voice sweet and sharp. "Clearly, white isn't for someone who can't keep herself clean." Soft chuckles rose from the far end of the table. I wasn't surprised. Family gatherings like these always felt like staged plays, with me as the silent extra, allowed to exist as long as I didn't disrupt the leads, the Whitmore family. But the script didn't go as planned. "That's enough." Jacob's voice rang out, clear and firm. He stood tall, holding the small camera like a weapon. "My mom has had enough. Grandpa will know the truth tonight." The laughter died instantly. Ethan turned to his son, his face pale, a flicker of something flashing in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was something closer to fear. "Jacob," Ethan growled, stepping toward him, trying to grab the camera. "Put that down. You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand." Jacob stepped back, gripping the camera tightly. "I've filmed enough. Everyone will know." "Know what?" Margaret slammed her hand on the table, lips pressed tight. "You're embarrassing the family." "Why is this boy allowed to speak like that at a party?" "Because no one else dares to," Jacob replied, his eyes glowing with a determination I'd never seen in a child. I opened my mouth to stop him, but then paused. I saw myself in his eyes, the young woman who once walked confidently into the Georgetown Law School auditorium, believing she was strong enough to change the world. Now here I was, drenched and humiliated, letting my son say what I should have said long ago. "What did you record?" Ethan asked, his voice beginning to shake. "Some childish nonsense." "You think that camera scares me?" Jacob didn't answer. He looked at me, eyes shimmering. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm sorry I had to do this in front of everyone. But I can't take it anymore." I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. "My love," I whispered back, "you did the right thing." Ethan looked stunned. "Lucy, you're encouraging him to tear this family apart." "What family, Ethan?" I raised my head and looked him in the eye, wine still dripping from my hair down my shoulders. "A family where a husband humiliates his wife in front of his mother and sister? Where I'm treated like a walking maid. That's a family." "What the hell are you saying?" Ethan growled. "You're my wife. You live in my house, spend my money. You should be grateful." Chloe laughed. "If she can't be grateful, she should at least know her place." Jacob tightened his grip on my hand. I turned to my mother-in-law. "Did you ever think that one day, someone would finally stand up and refuse to bow down?" Margaret raised her brows, her lips twitching. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said. "I'm just telling the truth." One of Ethan's aunts stood up, whispered something to her husband, and quietly left the table with him. One of Margaret's nieces folded her napkin, looking at me awkwardly. The air was thick like lead, cold like December frost. Ethan started to lose his temper. "I don't care what you're saying. Give me that camera, Jacob. Now." "No," Jacob said, stepping back again. "Ethan." I spoke soft but firm. "If you lay a hand on him, I swear I will." "What will you do?" he roared, but before he could take another step, the doorbell rang. Everyone froze. Jacob looked at me. "Grandpa's here." "What?" Ethan spun around. I didn't get a chance to answer. The front door swung open. The sound of leather shoes echoed across the hardwood floor. And then he appeared, my father, Richard Carter, in a gray suit, his face stern, eyes sharp like a scalpel. The air in the room felt sucked out. Every sound stopped. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice deep and firm. "I was invited to this dinner by a very special video from my grandson." Ethan's mouth fell open. "I think it's time we had a conversation about what's really been going on in this house." No one dared to sit. No one dared to breathe loud. I just knew Jacob was still holding my hand tightly, and in my heart, something flickered for the first time. Not fear, but hope. I was once a second-year law student at Georgetown University, one of my family's few shining points after years of hard work. My father, Richard Carter, served as a federal judge for over 30 years, a stern, honest man who always believed in the power of law, of justice, of independence. I once dreamed of standing in a courtroom like him, debating fiercely, helping those without a voice. And then Ethan walked into my life. He came with irresistible charm, honeyed compliments, and eyes that knew how to make a naive young woman feel special. Ethan was 6 years older, worked in real estate investment, lived lavishly, spoke smoothly, and most importantly knew how to cater to my dreams, or at least pretend to. He used to sit for hours listening to me talk about the Constitution, equality, and family law. He even once gifted me a leather briefcase with my name engraved inside. We married just after I turned 21. A lavish wedding at a beach resort that his mother, Margaret, constantly reminded me was a gift from the groom's family. I still remember stepping into the Whitmore family's mansion for the first time, the walnut floors gleaming, the heavy velvet curtains blocking out the sunlight. It felt like I had stepped out of my world into a castle they built, and I was only allowed to exist if I followed their rules. "My son is a successful man," Margaret said during our honeymoon, as I was washing my hands in the kitchen and she happened to walk in. "He needs a woman who knows how to step back, not someone who wants to compete for the spotlight." I laughed then, thinking she was just testing me. But I was wrong. That entire family never wanted me to have dreams of my own. They wanted me to become the textbook Mrs. Whitmore, gentle, quiet, always present at parties with a glass of wine in hand and a polite smile on my face, no matter what storm raged inside me. Less than a year after the wedding, when I told Ethan I planned to return to school, he threw my enrollment papers into the fireplace. "You're my wife now," he said, his tone so calm it was chilling. "I can provide for the whole family. You don't need to be out there trying to prove anything." I remember trying to explain that it wasn't about proving anything, I just wanted to live my passion. But he cut me off with a cold stare and a firm grip on my wrist, just tight enough to let me know I should be quiet. "I'm the one supporting you, Lucy." Margaret would repeat that line every time I brought up wanting to work or contribute financially. "You should be grateful you don't have to work like other women." Grateful. That word was repeated like a lullaby in their house. I slowly got used to gardening, cooking, cleaning, hosting parties. I even learned to call Ethan honey and in front of others. Learned to smile when Margaret critiqued my food. Learned to sit still when Chloe threw veiled insults about how I didn't deserve someone like her brother. In the beginning, I told myself it was just an adjustment, that being a daughter-in-law meant learning to blend in. But the longer I lived there, the clearer it became. I wasn't accepted, I was just kept because I wasn't strong enough to resist. Ethan didn't hit me in the early years. He just twisted things. The humiliating remarks, the sighs of frustration when I said something wrong, the sarcastic whispers during dinner parties that I couldn't respond to without seeming overly sensitive. And then, when Jacob was born, I disappeared entirely. Every dream I had was replaced with diapers, bottles, and midnight crying. But Jacob was also the reason I endured it for so long. He grew up in a world where every footstep had to be calculated, every sound had to be measured. When Ethan came home from lady work, Jacob would study his father's face, guess his mood, and immediately adjust his tone, his posture, even his breathing. Jacob, I once asked on a quiet evening when he had just turned 7, why did you turn off the TV without anyone asking? He looked at me with those deep brown eyes that mirrored mine and said softly, I heard Dad's breathing. He's tired today. I didn't want him to get mad. I wanted to hug him and cry. But I didn't. Because I was afraid that if I started crying, I wouldn't be able to stop. That was how I lived for nearly 10 years, in a house big enough to hide pain in every corner, every stairwell, every forced meal. My father didn't know. He just thought I was busy raising a child, calling home less, visiting less. Every time we spoke, I kept my tone upbeat. I'm doing great, Dad. Ethan takes such good care of us. I was the one who built that mask. And slowly I was the one being consumed by it. Until Jacob started looking at me with eyes that no longer belonged to a child but to someone who had seen, who had understood, who had remembered. That look filled me with shame. Not because I was weak, but because I was teaching my son that women had no way out. And then one day he stood in front of me, placed a small camcorder on the table, and said clearly, I won't let Dad make you cry anymore. I tried to stop him. I told him that everything in this house was a private matter. I said Ethan was still his father. But Jacob only shook his head. I know. But no one gets to hurt my mom. I think maybe he was the one who pulled me back from the edge. And it was him with eyes that had seen too much and a heart that had never known fear who opened the door I once believed was forever locked. I was never the nosy type. Or at least not before things started to fall apart. For years, I accepted my role in the household like a shadow behind Ethan. I never touched his computer, never asked about the numbers in our joint accounts, never questioned the sudden business trips or the nights he came home late smelling like unfamiliar cologne. But then things began to feel off. It all started one early fall morning when I was cleaning Ethan's home office downstairs. He had already left for work, and Jacob was attending online class in his room. I only meant to dust the desk and wipe down the keyboard like I always did. But this time, the screen was still on, and I saw an open email in the top right corner. The subject line was short. Account no, confirming transfer batch 3. I froze. My heart pounded strangely fast. I didn't fully understand all the financial jargon, but the number below $780,000 was far too high to be a regular paycheck or bonus. I hesitated for a few seconds, then carefully clicked. The inbox loaded dozens of threads, mostly filled with dense investment lingo. But what made my skin crawl were the sender domains. None of them matched any company Ethan had ever mentioned. Many were foreign domains, especially from the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. There was one attachment labeled sensitive doc, PDF. I didn't open it. I didn't dare. But I copied the entire email chain to the small USB drive I always kept on me, a reflex from my law school days. I didn't know what I was up against, but my instincts screamed that this was not simple. The next day, Ethan pulled into the driveway with a brand new black Range Rover, polished like glass. I watched it glide past the kitchen window, stopping in front of the garage like a silent power move. I walked out to greet him, keeping my face calm. What happened to the old one? I asked casually. Sold it. Company bonus this quarter. He smiled, twirling the keys on his finger. Did they cover the registration tax too? My question made his eyes narrow just for a second, then returned to normal. I have my ways. That night, I couldn't end his eye. Sleep. I lay next to him, listening to his heavy breathing, wondering who I was really married to. A week later, while I was hanging laundry outside, Jacob came out, looking different. He held his iPad close to his chest. I heard Dad on the phone, he whispered. I didn't mean to, Mom, but he was loud. What did he say? I asked gently. Jacob glanced at the door, then leaned closer. He said he had to delete the file. That if the company finds out, they'll investigate. And, he said, he needs more time to cover his tracks. I froze. Even the light breeze couldn't bring me back. I looked at my son with the eyes of a child who had seen more than his age should allow, and I saw fear. "Don't tell anyone about this, okay?" I squeezed his hand. "Let me handle it." That night, I went back to the USB drive. I opened the attachment. The document was a breakdown of multiple wire transfers to a chain of accounts, with recipients I'd never heard of. But one name stood out. A last name matching my mother's. I went numb. She passed away when I was still in high school. She had never been involved in anything remotely related to international finance. I began piecing it all together: the sudden overseas trips, the private investments Ethan never explained, and that one time he drunkenly joked, "Money is power. Whoever has the money writes the laws." I thought he was just showing off. But now everything felt terrifying. For years, I feared Ethan because he held all the power in the house. He controlled the bank cards, the cars, even my daily schedule. But now, that fear had turned into something deeper. A growing suspicion. Ethan wasn't just a controlling man within our family, he might be a criminal. I remembered something my father once told me when I was a freshman in college. "A man who lies about money never stops at just money." I didn't believe him. I didn't want to believe him. But now, I had no choice. Even I couldn't have imagined that what I stumbled upon that day would set off a chain of events with no return. It would turn my family into a battlefield where the strongest one wouldn't be the loudest voice, but the one holding the truth. While I was still tangled up in USB drives, suspicious emails, and numbers that kept me awake at night, someone else in a quieter, smaller corner of the house was already taking action. Jacob brought home an assignment on Monday. He dropped his backpack on the chair, took out a stack of books, and told me, "It's a group project for Miss Parker." About family. I was rinsing vegetables in the kitchen, trying to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't spiral. "Family, huh? Is it a poster or a short essay?" "We have to record a daily moment at home," Jacob said, placing his tablet on the table. "Conversations, dinner time, or how parents talk to each other. She wants us to learn how to observe emotions in the papal family." I froze. Not because of the project itself, but because of the look in my son's eyes when he said it. There was something firm in them, something that didn't belong to a child excited about homework. I turned to look at him, and saw him carefully wiping the camera lens on his tablet. "Jacob." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "What exactly are you planning to record?" "I'm already recording." I stood still. "What do you mean?" Jacob opened an app. Dozens of short video clips popped up on screen. Just a few minutes each. The interface was simple, but the file names chilled me. Dad yelling, 8:12. Dad banging door, 9:47 p.m. Knife in hand, Saturday, mom crying, kitchen. I couldn't breathe. "Jacob, I didn't know you. I had to do something, Mom." His voice didn't shake. "You won't tell Grandpa. You won't tell anyone. But you can't keep living like this. If I don't do something, then I'm wrong too." I pulled him into a hug, trying to hold back tears. "I just want to protect you. You think I don't see it?" Jacob looked up, his deep brown eyes locked on mine. "Every time Dad throws something, you look at me first. Every time he yells at you, you smile at me like everything's fine. But I know. You think I need protection, but really, you're the one who needs saving." Those words cut through every layer of strength I had built over the years. That evening, when Ethan went out to dinner with some clients, Jacob sat next to me and placed the tablet between us. "I already sent one clip to Grandpa," he whispered. "Just a light one. The part where Dad called you useless and threw the phone against the wall. I wanted to see if Grandpa would believe me." I held his hand tight. "And what did he say?" Jacob opened his phone and scrolled to the latest message from Grandpa, my father, Richard Carter. "Jacob, thank you. I believe you. I won't tell anyone, but I need more. This isn't just about your dad yelling. This is illegal. If you can do it, keep going. But be very careful. This evidence could save your mom." I was stunned. My father, so rigid, so rooted in order and protocol, was now quietly working with his grandson to do something I hadn't even dared to do. Not because he'd changed, but because he saw I had no way out left. From that day forward, Jacob became the quiet observer of our house. He placed cameras behind stacks of books, hid phones in planters, even tucked a mini mic inside the robe pocket hanging on the bedroom door. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to delete every recording of the screaming, the crashing, the footsteps stomping down the hallway at night. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew these weren't isolated moments anymore. They were our reality. And my son was collecting every one of those moments every time I flinched in the kitchen or instinctively dodged when Ethan raised a hand into a case that no one could ignore. One night I asked him, "Jacob, aren't you scared?" He shook his head. "Not as scared as I am watching you cry every day." I didn't know what hurt more. Hearing him say that, or knowing he was telling the truth. 3 weeks later, Jacob sat with me on the balcony. The house was quieter than usual. Ethan had gone to a company meeting in Atlanta. "I think I have enough now," Jacob said. "Enough of what?" "If Grandpa needs proof, then these clips. It should be enough." I stayed silent, watching the flickering lights beyond the fence. Ever since Jacob started recording, I had lived in constant contradiction. Grateful, but ashamed. Hopeful, but terrified. I once had a nightmare that Ethan discovered the camera, smashed it, then dragged Jacob out of the room. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. "Which clip did you send to Grandpa?" I asked. Jacob opened the tablet. On screen was a recording of Ethan shouting, "If I lose this contract because of you, then don't even bother opening your mouth again." Then the sound of a glass smashing against the wall. And me slumped at the stove, hands over my face. Jacob pressed send. The clip vanished from the screen, sent to his grandfather's inbox. I held my son close and said nothing else. I wasn't the one making decisions in this house. He was. And he had done what I couldn't. He exposed his father not out of hatred, but out of love for me. The evidence was taking shape. And I knew there was no turning back now. Ever since Jacob sent that final video to Grandpa, our house felt like it was holding its breath. To outsiders, everything looked the same. I still moved through the rooms, still made breakfast for Ethan, still placed napkins just the way Margaret liked them for holidays. But inside, everything was shifting. I knew a moment was coming when nothing could stay hidden anymore. And I sensed it was close. Ethan decided to host Margaret's 62nd birthday party at our home, planning an evening he described as elegant yet intimate. Intimate didn't include me and Jacob. I was just the cook. Jacob was told to eat early and stay in his room. "Tonight's guests are all adults," Ethan said when I asked if Jacob could attend. "You know how the boy asks childish questions that don't fit the occasion." "And me?" I asked softly. He pressed his lips together. "Of course you'll come out to greet the guests. Then go back to the kitchen to help the staff with the main course. It's Mom's party, and she doesn't like awkwardness at the dinner table." I didn't respond. I turned away, opened the fridge, and checked the sauce I had prepared that afternoon. That evening, the house filled with laughter, expensive perfume, and the voices of people who belonged to a different world. Ethan's entire extended family was there: his aunts, uncles, cousins, business associates. Even a distant aunt from Connecticut that Margaret only invited on special occasions to make the family look close-knit. I wore a simple cream-colored dress, tied my hair back neatly, and told myself I just had to make it through tonight. I stepped into the living room, smiling just enough, bowing just right, handing drinks to the right people. I had memorized it all like a stage script. "Oh, is that Lucy?" A tall woman in a deep red velvet shawl said loudly as I placed a glass of wine into her hand. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look pale." "She's always pale," Chloe chimed in, lifting her glass. "Too much time indoors, not enough social vitamins." Everyone giggled. I gave a faint smile, my hand steady on the tray. Margaret sat in the center of the room like a crowned queen. She wore a navy blue dress and a strand of pearls I'd never seen before. Beside her was Ethan, the perfect son, directing the entire event like a seasoned producer. "Everything good, Mom?" Ethan leaned in and clinked his glass against hers. "Very good," Margaret nodded. "The atmosphere, the food, the decor, it's all adequate. Just lacking a touch of class in the help." The words floated through the air like silk but landed on my skin like a whip. I heard someone snicker behind me. I took a breath, gave a small nod, and began stepping back toward the kitchen. I was just about to turn when Ethan's hand stopped me, pressing lightly against my lower back. "Hold on," he said, his voice louder than usual, smiling. "We can't be toasting my mother without a word from Lucy. That would be such a loss." I turned back. Ethan's eyes weren't smiling. "Come here," he said, half command, half reminder. I stepped forward, took the glass he handed me, and kept my face calm. "Wishing you a birthday full of joy, good health, and peace," I said. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be a part of this family." "Oh wow," Chloe sighed. "So modest as always. But honestly, she should be thankful." "Yes," Margaret added in her flat tone. "Ethan works all day, and she stays home. That's no small feat either." I smiled faintly, bowed slightly, and began to turn away. But Ethan didn't let it end there. "Wait," he said, raising his glass. "We should toast, right? To the woman who gave up her dream of becoming a lawyer to become the official chef of the Whitmore household." I froze. The laughter erupted again, louder. Someone even whistled. And then, before I could react, Ethan tilted his glass and poured the wine directly onto my dress. The cold hit me like an electric shock. The entire room went silent. The glass fell and rolled at my feet. My dress clung to me, soaked in red wine, dripping down to my ankles. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, heart still, eyes locked on the man who once promised, "I'll protect you for life." Chloe smirked. Relative tried to stifle an awkward chuckle. Margaret looked up like it was nothing more than a minor accident. But then, from across the room, a voice rang out clear and sharp. "My mom's had enough." Everyone turned. Jacob stood at the top of the stairs, wearing a white button-up shirt and dark khaki pants, holding the small camcorder I'd seen him with night after night. "Grandpa's going to know everything tonight," he said, his voice steady, cold. "The whole world will." A wave of silence swept through the room like snow falling in August. Ethan stood frozen, eyes locked on Jacob like he was a stranger. As Jacob's voice faded, the room dropped into complete stillness. Every eye turned toward my son, 10 years old, standing tall like a grown man, hand gripping that little camera. The world around me spun, not from the wine soaking my dress, but because I knew what was about to happen would change everything I once called familiar. The front door burst open. Without warning, 3 men walked in, their footsteps heavy and firm, bringing with them a chill that sliced through the already breathless air. Leading them was my father, Richard Carter, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his gaze sharp like a surgeon's scalpel. Behind him were 2 others. One was solidly built, wearing a charcoal gray suit, his expression calm like a man who had handled hundreds of urgent cases. The other, tall and lean with glasses, carried a thick leather briefcase. I recognized him as Vincent, a federal attorney who once worked alongside my father at the appellate court. My father needed no introduction. His eyes scanned the room, paused briefly on me, then shifted to Ethan, still standing dumbstruck in the middle of the room with an empty glass and a face he hadn't yet learned to mask. "I apologize for the unannounced visit," my father said, his voice unsettlingly calm. "But I believe this is the most appropriate moment to clarify a few things." "Richard," Margaret stammered, rising from the sofa, champagne glass trembling in her hand. "This is all just a misunderstanding. Ethan was just—" "We didn't come to hear your explanations," he interrupted, firm without raising his voice. "I've received over 30 video clips from my grandson in the past 3 weeks. Videos documenting emotional and physical abuse, threats, and indications of financial crimes within the family." No one spoke. Vincent opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents, dropping them onto the coffee table like an indictment against the entire room. "In our possession," Vincent said evenly, "are encrypted emails related to offshore banking transactions under Ethan Whitmore's name, including 3 accounts in the Cayman Islands, 2 in Luxembourg, and several disguised as domestic real estate fund transfers." "Stop," Ethan barked, his voice hoarse. "You're invading my privacy." "Not at all," my father replied coolly. "Your wife has the legal right to access shared marital devices. And your 10-year-old son did what the adults in this house should have done long ago." He documented the truth. Ethan's face turned red. His eyes locked on Jacob, who had now stepped beside me, still gripping the camera. You told Grandpa? Ethan hissed, his voice shaking with a mix of fury and fear. Jacob didn't flinch. I did. Because I don't want to see Mom afraid anymore. I placed my hand on my son's shoulder, feeling the tension in his small frame pulled tight like a bow at full draw. Margaret swallowed hard, setting her glass down. I didn't know anything about money laundering or whatever this is. This is between the couple. We're not involved. My father turned to her. You called your daughter-in-law a freeloader, demanded she drop out of school, and fully knew your son controlled both the finances and her life. If you didn't know anything, it's because you chose not to. And under the law, choosing not to know while assisting is complicity. Chloe stepped back, mumbling, I wasn't involved in any money stuff. The man standing beside my father, who I assumed was a former FBI agent, spoke up. In the clip from the 17th last month, you appear during a scene where Ethan clearly mentions transferring funds through the girl's account. That's a secondary account under your name, tied to a fund set up by your mother. Chloe's face turned pale. She stammered, that was money Mom gave me to buy the condo in Florida. I didn't know. We have the statements, Vincent said. Not only does it show the deposit under your name, it also details the source funds managed by Ethan's company, categorized as external operations costs, a clear violation of federal tax law. The atmosphere in the room shifted by the minute. What began as a glittering birthday party had now become something closer to an unofficial tribunal. The once glimmering glasses of red wine now left only smeared stains, evidence of a collapse unraveling with every spoken word. We haven't submitted to the prosecutor yet, my father said slowly, but that's only a matter of time. And if any of you think blame shifting or denial will cover this up, understand that once the evidence becomes public, every denial will be meaningless. Ethan slumped into the chair like the life had been drained out of him. I saw that man look small. The same hands that once gripped my shoulders hard enough to bruise were now trembling. You dragged your father-in-law and the FBI into my house. Ethan growled. What do you want? To destroy me in front of my entire family? I looked at him, voice low but steady. I want to protect my son. And I want my life back. No one laughed. No one came to Ethan's defense. The relatives sat there like wax figures frozen inside the color house once dressed up in appearances. And I stood in the center of the room, unafraid for the first time to speak the truth. My father nodded at Vincent. We've done our part. Now it's up to the authorities. But there's one thing I want you all to understand. He turned to Ethan, his eyes cold as winter. An abuser is condemned not only for the punch or the slap but for the cowardice of believing no one would ever speak up. Today, a 10-year-old child shattered that silence. And those who protect silence have no place in justice. I stood still in the room that still reeked of wine, with eyes around me wide and unsure where to turn. Jacob held my hand, his small palm warm and certain, while everything else around us crumbled. My father remained at the front, standing beside Vincent and the former FBI agent. They didn't speak. They didn't threaten. They simply waited, presenting the truth like blades laid out across a table, sharp, precise, and merciless. No one said a word until Chloe, Ethan's sister, suddenly broke down. I didn't know it had gone this far. She stammered, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding back something heavy. I thought that whole thing was already taken care of. What thing? My father asked, staring at her. Chloe turned to Ethan, eyes wide with panic. You didn't tell them? Ethan slowly shook his head. But the expression on his face was no longer anger or fear. It was hollow, as if what he feared most wasn't the law but a truth surfacing from his own family. Chloe, I said, what happened? She looked at me. For a second, her eyes weren't those of the woman who once mocked me at parties or laughed when I was humiliated. They were the eyes of someone who had witnessed something far too big, too horrifying to carry alone. 3 years ago, Chloe exhaled sharply. After a party at Uncle Peter's resort, Ethan drove back with a new personos employee from his company, a young woman, 25 years old. Her name was Eliza. I held my breath. They'd been drinking. Ethan told everyone there was a driver. But after the party, no one saw Eliza again. 2 days later, the police found her car in the river about 5 miles from the party. No. I shook my head, voice hoarse. That. Ethan told me it was an unexplained accident. The company mourned her, and he helped support the family. Chloe let out a bitter laugh. Oh, he helped. With $200,000. In cash. And a lawyer our mother provided. I turned to Margaret. Her head lifted, face drained of color. I did it to protect the family's reputation, Margaret said slowly. Ethan came to me the next morning. He said things could spiral out of control. I didn't think the girl had died. I thought it was just a small accident. And you helped him cover it up? Vincent asked, voice low but laced with disbelief. She called someone at the coroner's office. Chloe cut in. Told them to make it a quick check and close the file as accidental. I held Jacob. Not to protect him but because I needed something to hold on to. This house, every corner of it, was falling apart in front of me. And in return, Vincent looked at Margaret. Ethan wired money to your retirement account monthly. Margaret didn't deny it. She stared blankly into the void. What about Eliza? I asked, my voice cracking. Did her family never know? Chloe nodded faintly. They were poor. Her mother's a nurse in the suburbs. Father passed away. They accepted the settlement and believed she crashed alone late at night. No one ever told them she got into Ethan's car. I stepped back, feeling the edge of the table hit my leg, cold as ice. Jacob looked up at me. I still have one more video. Jacob. I shook my head gently, but he was already pulling the camcorder from his jacket pocket. No questions. No hesitation. He played the clip. Ethan was in his office, speaking on the phone. His voice was clear, confident, full of smugness. You don't get it? My whole family knows, but no one dares speak. My mom lives off the money I send her. Chloe got her condo under a fake name. My wife? That girl's just a cleaner. And the kid? He's too young to understand what real power is. I shut my eyes. Those words sliced through me like blades. I had once convinced myself Ethan was just temperamental, pressured, selfish. But no, he knew exactly what he was doing, and how to use everyone around him to hide it. My father took a deep breath, turning to the two men beside him. We have more than enough for a criminal case. Far more than enough, the FBI agent nodded. Domestic abuse, minor endangerment, money laundering, tax fraud, and now suspected indirect involvement in a fatal accident. I'll forward this to the district investigator. No. Margaret suddenly shrieked, her voice grating through her teeth. Don't do this. My family, the Whitmores, can't take another scandal. My father looked at her, unshaken. You should have thought about Eliza's family before you signed those papers. And about my grandson before you let your son turn a child into a witness. No one responded. I squeezed my son's hand, feeling Jacob's heartbeat pounding fast against my palm. The room was silent, like everyone was swallowing their own private dread. As for me, I wasn't afraid anymore. I saw clearly now the true faces of the people who had defined my life for far too long. And I knew that after tonight, every performance in this family was over. Ethan sat there, the same hands once used to drive luxury cars, sign contracts, and command obedience, now shaking uncontrollably. His face was pale, his lips pressed tight as if the slightest word might blow everything to pieces. The air in the room was so thick I could feel each nervous swallow, every suppressed breath from the people who once called themselves my family. My father Richard stood tall, resolute, eyes sharp like forged steel, and turned toward Ethan. His voice was so low it sent a chill through the walls. Now I want to hear you explain. Not to me, but to your son, to your wife, and to every person in this room who once called you family. Ethan lifted his head, eyes bloodshot, trying to appear composed but unable to mask the panic rising across his face. He didn't say a word, just breathed heavily, his Adam's apple bobbing like he was choking down something caught in his throat. Then, without warning, he jumped to his feet and lunged toward Jacob. Give that to me. Ethan roared, reaching for the camcorder in my son's hands. I screamed. No, don't touch my son. Jacob instinctively stepped back, clutching the camera to his chest. while I rushed forward to shield him. But before I could reach Ethan, a sharp motion cut through the room. Mark, the FBI agent, had surged forward like lightning, locking Ethan's arms behind his back in seconds. Ethan struggled. "Let me go. You have no right. This is my house. That's my son. Not your house anymore," Mark said, his voice calm but firm. Vincent pulled a folder from his bag, stepped forward, and placed it gently on the table. "You are temporarily restricted from contacting anyone in this home until the matter is formally addressed. The local police were notified earlier this morning. The district attorney will work with us directly on whether to proceed with charges." "Lies," Ethan shouted. "All of it's fake. This is her family's little setup." He turned to me, eyes burning like he wanted to set the room on fire. "You're a traitor. I supported you for 10 years. You cooked a few meals, cleaned a bit, and now you think you're a victim? You'd be nothing without the Whitmores. Without me." I didn't flinch. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't feel the need to justify myself. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "I had nothing. But that was before I realized I had a son, parents, and the truth. That camcorder is fake." Ethan screamed one last time. "You coached him to lie, edited the video cut and spliced." My father cut in, his tone eerily calm. "We submitted the originals to the DA this morning. Video, audio, device logs, even backup data from the cloud account Jacob created with help from his former teacher. Everything has been verified, encrypted, and authenticated by the FBI's tech division." Ethan stopped. It was as if the energy drained out of his body. He collapsed into the chair, his mouth slightly open but no sound coming out. Mark released him but stayed close like a steel wall. "I advise you not to try anything else. Any resistance from here could be considered an aggravating factor." Jacob still stood behind me, eyes wide, cheeks pale. I turned to hug him, running my hand over his hair. "You okay?" I whispered. Jacob nodded. "I'm fine, but Mom, were you scared?" I looked into his eyes that had seen more than any child ever should. I shook my head. "No. Because you taught me how to stand tall." Across the room, Margaret sat motionless on the sofa, her hands holding her head like she was just realizing the mask she and Ethan had worn for years had finally shattered. Chloe sat beside her, tears streaming silently down her face. No one in my husband's family defended Ethan anymore. No one dared look me or Jacob in the eyes. Status, power, reputation, all meaningless in the face of the naked truth. My father walked up to Ethan, not to threaten, not to intimidate, just to look him straight in the eye like a man who'd presided over hundreds of trials. "You can say whatever you want," he said. "But we hold the power, and you will answer not just for what you did to my daughter but for what you did to a 10-year-old boy you thought was too young to understand." Ethan didn't reply. He turned his head, avoiding eye contact, like he no longer had the strength to face anyone in the room. I looked at my dad and gave him a silent nod. He understood. He placed his hand on my shoulder, gentle, like a quiet vow that from now on, I would never face any of this alone. Inside me there was no triumph, no joy. Only a quiet release, like dust that had settled on my soul for years was finally being wiped away. I knew there was still a long road ahead. But I wasn't alone. I wasn't silent. And I wasn't afraid. Ethan was taken away shortly after. 2 uniformed officers in dark navy entered the house with calm authority, read out every word of the warrant, and cuffed him right in front of his family without adding a single unnecessary word. Ethan didn't yell anymore. He didn't resist. He said nothing. He just lowered his head, hair falling forward, to shield most of his face, feet dragging like he was walking the final stretch of a long, deceitful road. The house felt empty after the door shut. So quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock with every beat. I stood frozen, my hands still on Jacob's shoulders. His cheek pressed against my chest, his breathing steady like he was the one comforting me, not the other way around. Margaret slumped into the chair, hands still cradling her head, eyes fixed blankly on the floor. Chloe stood silently by the window, gripping the curtains so tight her knuckles turned white. Vincent spoke briefly with the FBI agent before turning to my father. "These 2 will be summoned during the investigation. Both accessed and benefited from unauthorized financial sources managed by Ethan. Grounds for further legal action. Margaret looked up, tired rather than combative. She asked just one question, voice hoarse. Will someone come arrest me too? My father responded plainly. That depends on your and your daughter's cooperation during the investigation. But tonight we're not looking to escalate things further. Vincent nodded respectfully to me, to Jacob, and to my dad, then left through the front entrance with his team. As the door clicked shut behind them, the entire world seemed to tilt. I sank into the chair, feeling the weight I had carried for years suddenly drop all at once. My body felt hollow, weightless but not free. I started to tremble. Not from fear but because I no longer had to pretend I wasn't afraid. Jacob stayed close. He sat beside me and wrapped his arms around me like I was the child who needed soothing. I'm okay, I whispered, but my voice sounded frail even to me. I only did what a dad should have done, Jacob replied softly, cheek still pressed to my shoulder. Protect Mom. I couldn't hold back the tears. Not the heavy sobs of the past, but the quiet kind of breaking, the kind that seeps from deep within. Like a hidden stream finally finding a path to the surface. I held him, one hand on his hair, the other clutching the back of his thin shirt. My heart had never ached and swelled with pride at the same time like this. My dad came over and sat in the chair across from me, silent for a moment before speaking. Lucy, he said, not like a judge, not like the strict father I once feared, but like a man speaking to a woman who had survived a battlefield. You've been strong, he continued. But strength isn't all you need now. It's time to stand, not just to protect yourself but to take back the life you let others define for far too long. I looked at him. His eyes didn't judge. Didn't rush. They just waited. Ever since you walked away from law school, I've never stopped thinking about it, he added. I wasn't angry, I was heartbroken. Not for reputation but because I knew you were born to stand for others. And you proved that today. Not with speeches, not with grades, but by teaching your son to live with integrity, even when the world around him doesn't. I bit my lip, trying to hold back the tears. I had forgotten what it felt like to be trusted by someone. To be reminded that I wasn't just someone who endured but someone who deserved better. I don't know if I have the strength to start over, I said. I'm just so tired, Dad. You don't have to rebuild everything overnight, he replied. You just need to take the first step. I looked over at Jacob. The child I once thought needed to be protected by silence, by endurance. But he was the one who had pulled me from the edge, who brought light back into my world. And if you want, Dad said, I'll be here. I'll drive you to class, watch Jacob when you need to study, and listen to every story about the cases you're preparing. If you still want to study law. I nodded. Inside, there were no words that could fully express what I felt in that moment. There was only one thing I knew for sure: I was no longer in free fall. I turned to Margaret, the woman who now looked like she had aged a decade in just a few hours. You knew everything from the beginning, I said, not with blame, not with resentment. I just wanted the truth. She looked at me, slowly nodded. I did. But I truly believed I had no other choice. Now you understand how I felt, I replied. She didn't answer. But I didn't need an apology. I didn't need her forgiveness for bringing everything crashing down either. Because the truth was she, like me, had let herself become a victim of a toxic cycle for far too long without daring to escape. As Jacob drifted off to sleep in my arms, I remained seated on the couch. The soft glow of the living room lights surrounded us. My father made me a cup of tea, set it down on the table, and motioned that I could rest whenever I was ready. I couldn't call this a victory. But I could breathe, in a space free of fear. No threats. No eyes watching my every move. No invisible chains labeled good wife. I was no longer a woman with her head down. And my child was no longer a boy who had to study his father's moods to survive each day. 6 months after that chaotic night, I walked through the gates of law school in a simple gray suit, hair neatly tied back, carrying an old leather briefcase my father once used during his teaching years. The red bricks of the school hadn't changed, but I was no longer the woman I used to be, nervous, shrinking behind glass doors, scared of other people's stares. I had come back. not to reclaim the lost years, but because I knew there were hundreds of women out there just like I once was, pushed into corners, forced into silence, and clinging to a fragile hope that someone might reach out just in time. The scholarship named Phoenix Protection Fund, established by my father and two of his former colleagues in law, was my first stepping stone. But what gave me strength every morning wasn't just the scholarship. It was Jacob's eyes every time he sent me off at the door. "Mom, stay calm like you did during that hearing, okay?" My son had matured far beyond his years. Jacob was no longer the little boy hiding in my arms when Ethan shouted. Now he was the one pulling me forward when I hesitated. After everything, the school invited both me and Jacob for counseling support. But after only a few sessions, Miss Parker, the teacher who once gave Jacob the topic, family and truth, called me, her voice full of emotion. "Lucy, I've never seen a student like Jacob," she said. "He hasn't just recovered from the trauma. He's leading the debate club. Every time he speaks, he says, 'Evidence is power. And silence sometimes enables injustice.'" Tears welled in my eyes. Some lessons I had never taught my son with words, but Jacob had absorbed them deeply with his heart. One day after I finished my first presentation in criminal law class, I received an email from the prosecutor handling Ethan's case. Inside was the official sentencing. Ethan was sentenced to 18 years in prison for 3 charges: organized domestic abuse, international money laundering, and obstruction of justice in the death of a former employee. I read every line, not with joy, not for revenge, but with peace. A sense that justice wasn't some distant concept, as long as someone was willing to stand and fight for it. Margaret and Chloe agreed to cooperate with the authorities and were granted leniency. They left the old mansion and lived more quietly, rarely mentioning the past. One day, Margaret sent me a handwritten letter, brief but sincere. I raised my son to be controlling. But my grandson Jacob taught me the opposite. "Please forgive me." I folded the letter and placed it inside a wooden box, alongside Ethan's case documents and the first photographs Jacob had taken, with that old camcorder. I called it the truth box. Whenever I lost my way, I would open it, look back at the path we had taken, and remind myself never to turn back. One crisp fall morning, I joined my father at a conference on reforming domestic violence laws. I wasn't sitting in the audience. This time I was a speaker. Before me sat hundreds of students, experts, attorneys, and police representatives. As I stepped up to the podium, I gripped the microphone, no longer shaking. I spoke about a woman who once gave up her dreams because of coercion, who lived under nameless rages, who was called a burden in her own home. But I also spoke about the son who hid a camera among his books, about the aging father who stood before his entire family to defend his daughter's dignity, and about the power of truth revealed at the right time. After my talk, a young woman approached me, eyes red. She held my hand tightly and whispered, "Miss, my mom is going through what you went through. How can I help her get out?" I sat with her, not rushing to answer but to listen. Because I understood that what people like her need isn't a textbook solution, but the presence of someone who has survived. On the way home, my father turned to me and asked, "Are you tired?" I shook my head. "No. I feel alive." He smiled, eyes full of pride. "Then you've already started doing what the law needs most: protecting people." That evening, Jacob proudly showed me his certificate for making it to the state finals in the debate competition. The topic of his speech was, "Justice is not a weapon, it's a light." I hugged him tightly. In that moment, I realized the wounds in my heart hadn't been in vain. From the darkness, my child had grown into a young man who knew how to shine a light for others. And I, once a woman who thought she'd never step beyond the kitchen, now stood in a courtroom not to plead, but to protect as a real attorney. The road ahead is still long, but I'm no longer walking it alone. And I carry with me truth, faith, and a dream that was once stolen. If you've listened this far, I believe this story has touched something inside you, whether it's because you've been through it yourself, or because you know someone quietly enduring in the dark the way I once did. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear how you feel about this journey, about Jacob, about fathers like Richard, and about the women who are slowly reclaiming their voices. Because sometimes, it only takes one person speaking up to change the fate of an entire family. If you believe in the power of truth, of family, and of courage, hit follow so you won't miss the next real stories. Stories about family, betrayal, forgiveness, and hope. Because sometimes, it's through the cracks that we see the true light of love.